Hi, welcome back to another episode of Tim's Garage. It's been a little while. We've been waiting for a part to arrive, and finally I have received my new aluminum Howe radiator that is unique for my Redline because it's an automatic radiator. Unfortunately, originally I was going to run with the Griffin radiator from RPM Motorsports, but their automatic version has the addition of a fill cap that mounts under the driver's side airbox mount for the factory airbox, and I'm not able to run that because I live in California, and in order to meet emissions I have to have a stock appearing intake tract. So as a result, I wasn't able to use that radiator. Instead, I had to order the significantly more expensive Howe radiator from Performance Autowerks, and it arrived yesterday. And the first thing I noticed, unfortunately, and we're going to go through a little unboxing of this radiator. I haven't had it out of the box yet, but I did notice that, unfortunately, Howe needs to do a slightly better job of packing the radiator box because, as you can see, one of the radiator outlets actually punched a hole through the box, which hopefully isn't a problem, but we'll find that out shortly. So I'll... in keeping with some of the new millennial ways to look at things, this is an unboxing of a Howe aluminum radiator. So I'll see if I can get a grip on this thing and get it out of the box. It seems like it's actually held by that end there. All right. Okay. Well, it came out pretty well. And in looking at the spout, it does not look like there's any damage or denting on it, but this is the replacement radiator for my Redline radiator, and you can see it's got the automatic transmission cooler built into the radiator, and it's got the mounts for the fan assembly. I'll go through fitting everything and show how everything works, but just to compare the radiator to the stock radiator, let's see if we can have a look at this. We've got the mounting of the radiator looks fairly identical. Obviously it is somewhat thicker, including in the mounting area right here. So we've got a little longer bolts and some other things that we need to do. But for the most part, with the exception, oh, actually I can see that this is dented. It's all dented in right here. So I'm not sure if that's going to be a problem or not. I'll be putting a call in and see. But I suspect that that's going to work. So, that said, I've got the new radiator, and we're going to be all set to start reassembling the car, provided everything fits up and works okay. I do know that the fan assembly, I'm told, requires a little bit of trimming. So I'm looking at the fan assembly itself, and it looks like in order to get the fan to fit, I'm going to have to remove probably about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of the fan shroud to get this to fit flush with this, to mount that fan assembly down against the radiator. You can see that it's got a bit of a gap there, and in order to get these brackets to drop down into their slots means I'm going to have to do some fitting. So I'll go ahead and do that, but first I'm going to make sure that this isn't a problem with it being slightly tweaked in. That's not making me very happy at this point, but we'll see if that's something that can be corrected. All right, well, radiator's here. I get to put the car together, provided that is okay, and we'll move forward from there. Thanks. Hi. Just thought I'd show just how quickly and easily this can be repaired. I've worked on vehicles my whole life, and something like this, you know, you don't get too stressed over things coming with just a slight amount of, you know, damage. Things happen. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got a socket that fits very closely inside the opening, and I just there we go. We've now got the The opening put back together, nothing's cracked, it's no longer depressed, and we have it corrected. All right. Sometimes the easy fix is the best fix. Okay, so I've managed to get the fan shroud mocked up against the Howe radiator, and as you can see, I've got quite a bit of gap between the mounting surface and the flange that's here. And that gap looks like I need to remove, well, from the side here, almost 3/4 of an inch of material in order to get it to drop down to its point. Now I've marked out where I'm going to begin the trimming on the sides, and I used 1/2 inch masking tape there, and I used 1/4 inch masking tape along the top edge of the fan shroud so that I can go ahead and figure out how much I need to trim. And in looking at the what looks like about 5/8 of an inch of gap there, I may need to trim a little bit more, and I may mark this out just a little bit closer one more time to make sure I've got enough material to come off. I don't necessarily want to trim this 2 or 3 times, so I'm going to go ahead and get this trimmed, and I'll give you guys an idea of how I do this as we move forward. My intent right now is to mark it out with the masking tape initially, and then use a paint marker to mark out the silver and then cut it out with an air-powered hacksaw. Okay, I've gone and marked out where I'm going to be cutting it, and I've marked out with a line at the 5/8 of an inch mark all the way along the edge of the fan shroud. And I'm using one of these, which is an air-powered hacksaw, to be able to cut through the piece very easily, and you can see the line that I've trimmed and how neatly it cuts it along that line. I'm going to be able to trim this off. It's going to be a little difficult to trim in with a short blade around the upper bracket, but I'll go ahead and get that done, and I will give you guys a look once I've got it all trimmed. Okay, so now that I have the sides trimmed out to fit the tanks, and I'll show you how I finished those, and I finish them with a file. Now I'm marking the bottom, and I'm marking this 3/16 of an inch. I used 1/4 inch tape to break out the line. I've traced it with a little bit of silver paint marker so that I have a nice cut line that's left on the panel for me to cut along with the air hacksaw. Okay, and there we have it. I've got the fan shroud all trimmed, and I've taken 5/8 of an inch off the sides and 1/4 of an inch off the top and bottom. You can see the strips that I cut off. I used an air hacksaw in order to be able to remove it, and then I used a die grinder to be able to, create nice little rounded corners on the top and bottom where it's going to be fitting. When you trim off the top, one of the things you will need to do is you'll need to grind down these little posts just a little bit on both sides on the top so that it doesn't interfere with the Howe radiator and it sits nice and flush. So I'll show an image or a little video of what it looks like actually installed on the radiator next. Okay, now we've got the fan shroud completely mounted to the Howe radiator. You can see that the tabs now lock underneath the edge of the fan shroud, so that it's kind of clamped into the radiator. You can see I've got it fitting very nicely around all of the edges of the radiator. It's got a nice gap. The only thing that I've got, and I'm not going to trim it any further, is you can see that there's a little tiny bit of a gap. It's not very focused there. Let's see if I can get that focused. Got a little tiny bit of a gap there underneath the fan shroud to the radiator. On both sides, I'm going to take that up with a washer. And as it stands right now, I still get to retain the clamp, the holes for the little push pins that are going to hold the upper splash shield or air duct in the car. So I've got it all set. I finally have it fitted. I get to go ahead and install my Howe radiator. You can see this radiator is substantially thicker than the stock radiator, and I'm very excited. That will be my next step. Okay, here we go. One last look at the Howe radiator with the fan shroud fitted onto it. I've managed to get the fan shroud all secured, got the tabs interlocking the way they're supposed to. I've got everything fitted. I've got the gaps nice along the top and bottom so that it is secured, and we are absolutely good to go to get this thing installed. I can't wait to do it. Okay, so after all the modifications to the fan shroud assembly, I've now been able to install the radiator into the car completely with the fan shroud assembly tightly mounted up against the radiator. So have a look here and I'll show you a couple of the things that are unique to the Howe Radiator that made it really nice for me to be able to do that. Number one is it's got really strong fittings right here that allow us to bolt the fan shroud to it. Originally I was going to put a washer in between the fan shroud and the radiator, and I found that it had just enough deflection that when I tightened it up, it was held very nicely up against the radiator, and it didn't need any washers or any kind of spacer in between. So I just did it up nice and tight, and it took up that 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch gap nicely. Second thing is we've got a nice air bleed hose that's a 90-degree fitting that threads in the top, and it comes off just a little bit off of center to the hose that runs to the coolant reservoir. That hose will allow all of the air to be able to be expelled from the top of the header tank and be purged out in the coolant reservoir right here, which works out very well. Okay, the next thing is that I managed to get the charge tube back mounted again, and it's got the proper clearance underneath on both sides to the factory airbox. And I wanted to run the factory airbox so I don't run afoul of California emissions and the car looks stock as far as possible with all the components installed. The next thing that was kind of a nice feature is that the Howe Radiator, because it has this little air bleed here, is not like any of the other ones that might have a radiator cap located on the top. You can run those if you're going to run a cold air intake, but I wanted to run the factory intake and have it look as stock appearing as possible, and this worked out for me to be able to do that. The next thing that I managed to get done is I managed to reuse the DDM cross brace, and the DDM cross brace interfered with the fan shroud assembly right at the electrical module that's mounted on the fan shroud assembly, but I found that by slotting the holes, and I'll show an image in the video, in slotting those holes, I was able to slide the brace back on the passenger side about 1/4 of an inch. And when I slid that back 1/4 of an inch, with it moving backwards, it allowed for it to clear the fan shroud and yet still use the DDM brace mounted to the frame, and I didn't have to discard it, which I thought I was going to have to. The last thing is I managed to use the factory automatic transmission fittings. There's an upper one here, and then there's a lower one that's mounted way down below. But the upper one here, those two fittings just simply unscrew from the factory radiator assembly. And I screwed them back in here, and then simply pressed the lines back into the fitting as per a normal factory fitment, and then put the caps on top. And I just used a factory O-ring that was on the factory fitting on the GM radiator, and it's now all mounted up really well. All the rest of the accessories, like the front power steering cooler, bolted right back up on bracketry on the front of the radiator. So I have now got the radiator all installed, and it is now ready for me to move forward and start with getting the turbocharger installed. So once I have an opportunity to install the turbocharger, I'll come back and I'll give you guys a little bit of a heads up on how that looks as I start to install it. So thank you for watching. This was a little longer video than normal. Please like and share if you can, and subscribe. I'm getting pretty excited. We're up over 220 subscribers now, so you know it's a slow go, but we're making it work. Thanks for watching.